Joining us now here on the Picks for Pros podcast, we've got John Boy Media's very own Bobby Skinner in the house. One of the more underrated, but also better New York Giants follows out there and content creators on Twitter. You can check him out on Twitter at Bobby Skinner _. Bobby, how's it going? Thanks so much for hopping on here today.
Good, man. Excited to come on here, talk about the Giants offseason, and how it crosses over to the Bears. Glad to be on.
Yeah, I mean, and let's just get right into it because New York's got the 6th overall pick. They're going into the year 3 of the Brian Daboll, Joe Schoen era. It's interesting because Daniel Jones had a kind of revival of a season about 2 years ago at this point. And then last year, everything kind of crashes and burns. He goes down with the ACL injury. But even before that, nothing was really going right for New York. And so now there's a lot of questions as to what this team is going to go ahead and do. But, first things first, we have to know, what were your initial thoughts on their 2023 season? And how do you feel like everything went? What's next for this team?
Yeah, if you watch the Sunday Night Football game versus the Cowboys to start the season, that first drive was basically an indicator of how the season went. They drive down, then they have a missed snap, gets them, they're going ready to kick a field goal. The field goal gets blocked. Andrew Thomas, the star left tackle, gets injured on that field goal. And then the rest of that game was just horrible. And that's what it was for about the first half of the season. It went about as bad as it possibly could go, right? The offensive line was the worst I've ever seen it. Daniel Jones didn't step up to the plate when there was stuff there to be taken. And then defensively, they just didn't have the talent to really thrive on top of that. They obviously had some good moments in the second half of the season, but it really started with Daniel Jones not taking the stuff that was there, the things they asked him to get better at, and the offensive line just being in total disarray. It was a huge mess to start the year.
Okay, so you mentioned, Daniel Jones being in complete kind of old Daniel Jones mode, because I think after the first year with Brian Daboll, there was a lot of people who were saying, hey, maybe, just maybe, this is a partnership and a marriage that could actually work. But what do you think went wrong for Daniel Jones specifically? Because he's kind of the wild card in this offseason, I feel like, from an outsider's perspective, because you don't sign a guy to, a big extension like they did with Jones last offseason, only to kind of throw in the towel just a year into the deal.
Yeah, so obviously Andrew Thomas, the left tackle, being out was huge, right? He's literally an all-pro left tackle. And you look at Daniel Jones' success in his career, it's kind of been tied to Thomas when you look at him in the lineup and him out of the lineup. And that was bad, right? It just messed with Daniel Jones' clock. But they also, they spent the last offseason trying to become a more explosive offense, right? And Daniel Jones thrived the year before with the lack of, any explosive threats outside of Darius Slayton, and they ran an offense that was extremely efficient. Daniel Jones didn't turn the ball over at all. They were getting the ball out on time. They were able to take advantage of some defenses using play action. This past year, they added Darren Waller, added Jalen Hyatt, Wan'Dale Robinson coming from the injury, and then keeping Darius Slayton. And it was an offense that wasn't set to be a top of the NFL, but was going to become more explosive. And when Daniel Jones was put on his plate as far as pushing the ball down the field, processing the deep part of the field better, he just didn't answer that. And then they didn't have the offensive line to really succeed in any other ways either. And then you pile on top of it, he had a neck injury, his second neck injury of his career, comes back from that and tears his ACL in less than a half. I mean, it was about as, you could have maybe forecasting it not being good, but it was the worst case scenario on every front for Daniel Jones.
And so on that note, you kind of mentioned how they wanted to get more explosive in the vertical passing game. I mean, what about on the ground? Because I know the update came out that Saquon Barkley, they're unlikely to franchise tag him. They were kind of playing this cat and mouse game with him. And I think if you really look at a lot of these rosters over the years that the Giants have put together, I mean, Saquon Barkley, in a sense, has shouldered, and we've seen what he can do when he's healthy, but he's also been injured. But what's going on with the Saquon Barkley situation? Because at this point, it seems like he's going to hit free agency. Joe Shane and Dable, they know what he brings to the table, but they haven't necessarily fully committed to him. They were playing this cat and mouse game all of last offseason before he pretty much relented and then showed up to camp.
Yeah, I think it's time for both these sides to move on from each other, right? I really think it's better for both parties. For Saquon Barkley, he's been playing behind a bad offensive line. I thought Saquon Barkley played well this year, but you look at the Giants' rushing offense, and it was bad. It was a bad rushing offense. But in the past, Saquon Barkley has been able to account for that and create explosive plays. He didn't do that this year, right? He's not the same player he was earlier in his career with the Giants, where he made not something out of nothing, but made home runs out of nothing. Doesn't happen anymore. They had no carries over 40 yards this season, where that's, you remember the early Saquon, and that was there. So Saquon needs to go play behind a better offensive line, and he's still a good running back. He's just not the great running back that he once was. And from the Giants side point of view, they can't continue investing into the running back position while having a bad running game. And their offensive line is not going to be fixed overnight. They can add improvements, but a big part of that would be using, free agent money on the offensive line position. And that money that's used on Saquon Barkley would be better suited to go get a Michael Nwaneri from the Patriots or someone of that nature. And we're heading into year 7. He's missed games almost every single year. It just seems like for both parties, it's best for them to move off of each other. But it seems they also can't quit each other too.
Yeah, it is this really intriguing relationship that I feel like you just kind of have to follow, because knowing the way that this running back position is treated in the NFL, I mean, teams are certainly going to look at this free agent running back class and they're going to look at it and say, hey, you've got Austin Eckler and Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard's in there. And nobody wants another 2019 Le'Veon Bell situation where you commit big money to a guy and then he just kind of falters. Now, the one exception with that situation was Le'Veon was out for a year, but getting into a lot more this offseason, because that Saquon Barkley decision, I mean, it's not going to be they've kind of already made the decision, but it doesn't seem to be official yet. It's not going to be the only big decision that New York has to make. Is quarterback a realistic option at 6th overall, knowing that Daniel Jones has really showed inconsistency on the field, but then also he's coming off an ACL injury. He's also been injured multiple times now over the last 5 seasons.
It should be. Now, here's the issue with the Giants is that there's a good chance quarterbacks are going with the top 3 picks. And then do you want to take the 4th quarterback at the 6th overall pick? Like, I would not be a fan of that. They should, and I think they believe and want to go get their new franchise quarterback and cut their losses on Daniel Jones, despite the fact that they invested in him, right? And this was not part of the plan at all, was to do this in year 2. It was possibly in year 3 or year 4 of this contract when they thought about the idea of taking a quarterback. But it should absolutely be in play. And I think if there is any team in the top 3 willing to trade down, I think the Giants should explore that. I think going to 1st is a leap, because I don't think the Bears, want to trade out of 1. And if they do, it's going to be an insane haul that would get them out of there. But, there's rumblings that maybe the Patriots don't take 1 at 3. But the Giants, they need to find their franchise quarterback. They have a lot of other shit they got to figure out too. But that's to me, should be their number 1 priority.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because a bit of family history here, but my dad and his 2 brothers, they actually grew up in the New York, New Jersey area. I was born in that area too. So the Giants have always kind of had this soft spot in my heart, even though I'm sitting here covering the Bears and grew up a Bears fan. But I mean, you mentioned, would you really want to take one of, let's just say, those 4 quarterbacks that are projected to go in the top 10, and it's looking more likely Caleb Williams. I mean, not necessarily a realistic option for them, because Joe Shane to me does not seem like the guy who's going to sacrifice the farm for a franchise quarterback, or moving up, I should say, for Caleb Williams. And then you get into maybe a Drake May slips, or maybe McCarthy's there, or Jaden Daniels. Do you have a preference when it comes to any of the other three in terms of who you would like to see in this Brian Dable offense?
So not counting Caleb Williams.
Yeah, not counting Caleb Williams.
So I haven't done a full dive into these cats yet, but I have watched them, right? I've watched some broadcasts. I've watched some of their wide receivers, some of their offensive linemen, and paid attention to them. Drake May would be my preference. I watch him. I see the arm talent. I see him be able to avoid pressure, make big plays. He is, to me, I think he's closer. Like, I think he's in competition with Caleb Williams to be the number one QB in this draft. So Drake May is the one that I look at. I've only watched J.J. McCarthy casually, so I don't want to say one way or the other. And then Jaden Daniels, I think, has a lot of talent, would be a good fit with Brian Dable in that offense that's begging for them to push the ball down the field. But I would take I would take Drake May out of the three.
Yeah, I mean, it's this kind of, I personally would love to see Jaden Daniels in that role, but I also kind of look at this and say, realistically, you got Harbaugh from Michigan, who's now with the Chargers, hyping up JJ McCarthy, and you kind of always know that that's just a college head coach or former college head coach hyping up, what was his multi-year starter. Jaden Daniels, I love his talent, athleticism, and skill set, but I think he's kind of a wild card. Now, I will say, I mean, in the event that, let's just say, Saquon Barkley's back, I would love to see a 1-2 punch where it's Jaden plus Saquon in the backfield, just because I think leaps and bounds, Jaden Daniels is more athletic than what Daniel Jones brings to the table. But let's just say they don't take a quarterback at 6th overall. I mean, what are some positions to go ahead and know? Because I could certainly see wide receiver or even offensive tackle being a legit option for this team. Now, I don't think they're going to take a left tackle because Andrew Thomas is pretty darn good, but maybe right tackle with Joe Alt, the Notre Dame kid, is something that they look at and they explore.
Yeah, I think the Giants end up landing on wide receiver because you're going to have that best player available meet need for them. Marvin Harrison Jr. is obviously going to be the number one wide receiver off the board, 3 QBs. Well, that leaves one pick in between the Giants. I think they're going to end up on wide receiver if Malik Neighbors is there. Offensive tackle is in play for the Giants. I've talked with people in the Giants, and they've said that. You'd be giving up on Evan Neal, but I don't think Evan Neal's shown you anything to say that you can't give up on him either. So I think it's wide receiver. If there was 3 positions I wanted the Giants to get outside of quarterback, it'd be wide receiver, tackle, or edge. I don't think the edge there's an edge worthy of be taken there. Tackle, you've already got Andrew Thomas. Maybe you give Neal another year. I think wide receiver ends up being the pick for the Giants at 6.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those where you look at and you say, okay, if you are going to run it back with Daniel Jones, wide receiver would definitely make the most sense. And that's because if you look at his career in New York traditionally, I mean, he's never really had a top tier wide receiver room compared to a lot of these other quarterbacks that have kind of been taken in the first round. I mean, so it's going to be.
I would be doing that independent of Daniel Jones too. I'm a big believer in best player available for the most part. And I just see wide receiver being that for the Giants. And again, it's married to need as well. So, that would be, even if they could cut Daniel Jones and sign, whatever, Jacoby Brissett or somebody, I think wide receiver would be that just because I think it's going to be best player available for them.
Yeah, you're right. I think irrespective of Daniel Jones, I mean, you still have to add to that wide receiver room because realistically, you've got Darius Slayton, who, again, has really become this kind of underrated fan favorite. He's been there since the Dave Gettleman days. And then on top of that, you have Jalen Hyatt from Tennessee, who, yes, you invested a high pick in last year. But if you look at where they're at, I would even go ahead and say this. It's a total toss-up for who ends up being the second wide receiver taken off the board, because I could certainly see Rome Odunze from Washington being a guy that this team absolutely falls in love with because of his big frame, the massive catch radius that he has, the silky smooth feet that he has when it comes to his route running.
Yeah. So I haven't watched Odunze fully yet, so... But when I watch Neighbors, I see someone that I could see them wanting to put in this type of Brian Dable offense. And I get now tackle could be it too. Like there's good tackles, right? Like I like Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. Tyrese Fuaga out of Oregon State. We talked about edge. Laitu Latu's looked at maybe the top edge. Fuaga dominated him in that matchup, and he's got the type of body that can play guard if Evan Neal were to develop. So I think those two positions are the ones that the Giants would be picking from if they stay at 6 and don't get a quarterback, obviously.
Yeah, it's gonna be they're kind of I feel like one of the wild card teams, but looking at this thing from a division rivals point of view, because you got the Bears there at 1, you've got the Commanders there at 2. I mean, is there any sense amongst Giants fans and kind of beat writers and I guess content creators that they absolutely don't want to see the Commanders make a move up to first overall for a quarterback?
No, I would kind of like the Commanders to do that because I think Caleb Williams and Drake May are both going to be great quarterbacks in the NFL. So I would actually like the Commanders to. Hey, I wouldn't want them to get a great quarterback, but if they have the choice of 2 and one comes with giving away some of their other picks, then I would like that because they have a bad offensive line situation. They're lacking a lot of talent on defense. That quarterback is not going to be in the situations for success outside of them having a good wide receiver core.
Yeah, I mean, they're total wild card because everyone links them to Caleb Williams just because they did hire Cliff Kingsbury, who was his quarterbacks coach at USC and served in another completely different capacity. But also, I mean, it'd be kind of foolish for them, especially after hiring Adam Peters away from the 49ers organization. Now, again, Peters was part of that front office that gave up 3 first-round picks for Trey Lance a couple of years ago. So it's definitely something that I don't say is out of the realm of possibility, but it wouldn't necessarily be the smartest move. All right, so got a couple more for you here, but looking at this thing from a Bears and Giants perspective, I mean, how do you think, because the Bears are at 9, the Giants are at 6, but how does the Giants draft plans, how does that impact what the Bears could ultimately have to do at 9th overall? Because Chicago's a team, they've been actively linked to wide receivers. They've been actively linked to the edge rushers as well. They've also, in a sense, been linked to Olu Fashanu, Joe Alt, the Notre Dame and Penn State guys, but they haven't been linked to Fuega by any means.
So let me ask you about the Bears and their offensive tackle situation. They drafted Darnell Wright in the top 10 last year. I don't see them working to replace him. How is Braxton Jones? Because he's someone that I hear good things, but I've never actually really sat and watched him.
Yeah, he is, honestly, for a guy that was drafted in the 5th round in 2022, I mean, he's been phenomenal. And I get everyone likes to go ahead and cite the PFF statistics and all that. I'll be honest with you. I mean, me being a football coach as well, I'm going to look at this thing and I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, the advanced analytics and all that are great, but sometimes you just have to go old school and look at the film. He's been really solid. He's, what I say this, if I had to give him a real grade, been above average in terms of his talent, his athleticism. He's got a pretty strong anchor, really solid in the passing game as a pass blocker, but I think even better in the run game, which if you look at this Shanahan style offense that the Bears are going to run with Shane Waldron and Luke Getsy over the last couple of years, I mean, it kind of fits Braxton Jones to a T. But I was also on someone else's podcast yesterday, and I kind of said, hey, if there's an opportunity to go ahead and upgrade that left tackle position, then you ultimately do so, because very few teams can claim, hey, they've got 2 top 10 tackles on their offensive line that are both on rookie contracts with the potential to have a first-year quarterback on a rookie contract for the foreseeable future as well. That's 3 of your most important positions right there, and you've got core guys on rookie deals.
Yes, but I can see the Bears wanting to get a wide receiver, right? You have a bona fide wide receiver one in DJ Moore. He's one of my favorite. To me, that the Bears getting DJ Moore in that trade last year is what made it such a great trade. I was shocked that the Panthers were willing to part ways with him. And you saw what he did this year, right? I think he had over 1,300 yards. He was a wide receiver one. I think some people had doubt that he was in Carolina, but he always was that in Carolina. But pairing a wide receiver with that quarterback, I feel like, or with DJ Moore and for the new quarterback, I feel like would be the best fit for them, especially if they, again, with a young quarterback, the way you can bring them along is work them to be aggressive, right? Hey, you're going to have interceptions. You're going to take some sacks. You may not see everything right, but can we create explosives? And a wide receiver to pair with DJ Moore would just help instill that confidence for that quarterback to grow the way he needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, see, I'm split with what the Bears should do at 9 because I have looked at this and said, hey, maybe there is a team that would love extra draft capital, New York, for example, where you go ahead and you make that jump up to from 9 to 6 and then kind of works out for both sides. But then I also look at it and say, I could definitely see Chicago sitting there at 9. But I think what makes the Giants such a fascinating study for this offseason, one of the more fascinating teams, is simply that, again, this is a team, they've got a handful of unknowns. On paper, they seem like they've got a pretty good core, but the wild card's obviously Daniel Jones there. But last one for you here. I mean, realistically, let's say New York does decide to, well, actually I got two more for you, but let's just say New York decides, hey, we're going to go ahead, we're going to trade up for a quarterback. I mean, what do you think a realistic amount of assets is in a trade package that Dable and Shane are willing to give up?
Well, we saw the Jets and Colts trade in 2018. They went from 6 to 3. They gave up the 6th pick, obviously, and then 3 second-rounders. The Giants have 2 good second-round picks with their own, and then one they got from Seattle. And they'd obviously have to give a future. So that would be the one that you like the most, right? I would sign up for that any day of the week. But if they're having to trade up 2-1, they're going to have to give up a first in next year's draft as well, paired with a couple second-round picks. And then I just don't see a trade up to 1 being in the cards.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like these teams kind of, if you're not picking like first or second overall, then you're most likely not going to get a future first round pick. Now, you may get a future first round pick, but that may be coupled with, a handful of seconds, and you may not get, multiple first round picks. All right. Last one from me here, but you're going to year 3 of the Brian Dable, Joe Shane era. What trends have you seen from those two over the last 2 years, especially in the NFL draft, that you think someone outside this fan base needs to know and follow and understand to really get an idea of what they could do in the first and second round on Thursday and Friday night?
Well, one, they like to get guys that are younger, right? So like, the 20 or 21-year-old guys in the draft. But if you're really trying to figure out like what individual players and not necessarily trait stuff, look at their top 30 visits that they do, right? And, like top 30 visits are they a smokescreen? Are they trying to rule guys out? They have went to the well with that. Even on day 3 with some of the smaller school guys, like a guy out of Old Dominion was one of their top 30 visits. He ended up being picked in the 6th round by the Giants. So I would pay attention to their top 30 visits, and they like to take guys that are younger. So like a guy like, Laitu Latu, if they were to trade back, probably wouldn't be on their board. But those are the trends that I've seen the most from the Giants, is like they like to draft the guys who are 20 and 21 years old. And then also they like to stick to their top 30 visits because they feel like they need to draft the person just as much as the player, and, getting to know these people personally and knowing what makes them tick.
Yeah, I mean, they're one of those teams, I feel like you mentioned, there's teams that covet athleticism. There's teams that covet experience more than anything in a lot of these prospects. There's teams that will draft more upper versus underclassmen. The Giants, I feel like, are kind of right there in the middle, in the sense that if news breaks that, okay, they're bringing a guy for a top 30 visit and it's usually a younger guy, you can probably bet that they're high on their board. But any draft crushes that you have specifically that you've been kind of looking at this offseason, irrespective of what the Giants may or may not do?
Okay, so let me pull up. So now I take my time, so I only have about 18 full evaluations. Obviously, I was down at the Senior Bowl, so I got some thoughts on a lot of those guys. Maybe this is someone for the Bears. LSU wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. Everyone talks about Malik Neighbors for good reason. that guy's 6'4", and you think, okay, I'm about to pop on the tape for the 6'4" wide receiver. Am I going to see a guy who catches a lot of contested catches and maybe took advantage of some bad DB play? He can move. He is a 6'4" who separates vertically, but if the ball's behind, he's going to go up and above the rim and grab the ball, and he can be used as a yak threat. And the things that he needs to improve on are things that are like right there, right? With his intermediate routes or his quick routes, the things like, man, just take this extra step, and this is a much better route with your size and speed. So Brian Thomas Jr., the wide receiver out of LSU, is one. Guys in the middle round, Peyton Wilson, the linebacker to NC State, love his game. I know he's got medical red flags, but I think if he's on the field, he's going to be playing really well for whoever gets him. And then also this could be in play for the Bears or the Giants in the early second round is Graham Barton, the offensive lineman out of Duke, who's probably going to move on the inside. I think that guy's going to figure it out and be a stud for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. Thanks so much for hopping on here. But where can kind of people follow your work and find you on Twitter?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Bobby Skinner _ if you are coming for, not just a Giants, and analysis, which I'm sure most Bears fans aren't really interested in listening to a Giants podcast. Check out JM Football. All our draft breakdowns are on there. I do a show twice a week with Chris Rose of the NFL Network. Just talking about the NFL storyline. So JM Football on YouTube is the go-to place for NFL content for us.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Go ahead and make sure that you check them out. Thanks so much for hopping on. We'll definitely have to do this again sometime because these two teams seemingly have been linked forever, dating back to the early days of the NFL. But yeah, thanks so much for being on here.
Thank you, guys.